YouTube that shows how to make a bowl from a board, and most of those are going to be made with a bandsaw. They're going to cut the initial rings with a bandsaw. So I'm going to step over here and grab another bowl real quick. So this bowl was cut on a bandsaw. The way that I did that, if you got real close to it, and I'll pass it around so that you can see it, but if you study the rings, you'll see that there is a saw curve. There is a glue line there where I had to glue it back together. And so the principle when you're cutting one on a bandsaw is you're going to use at least 2 pieces of wood. You could use multiple pieces of wood, but you'd have to cut all of those and glue them back together to make your rings. Generally what you do if you're using 2 pieces of wood is you would lay it out and you would draw your concentric circles, determine what angle you want to cut the edges, and set your bandsaw table at that angle. Typically 45 is the most popular. Start cutting from the outside and just work your way in so that when you're done, you're going to have multiple half circles out of the left half of the bowl. And then you repeat that and cut the right half of the bowl. You take those to your table, match them up, and you glue those into rings. And then you start the stacking process to glue it up. That's how this bowl was done. This one had a dovetail in it just for design. But you can lay it out and then cut all of the walnut half rings, come back and cut the cherry half rings, and then you can put them back together, slide that dovetail back together, and cut them like that. Okay? There's another YouTube out there. The guy does some excellent work, and one that I'd recommend that you look at. When he cuts his, he used a circle cutting jig on his bandsaw, and he actually cut it in a solid piece and cut through the outer ring on each one. And then when he got ready to glue the rings back together, he glued the curve. So you could do that, but it's going to have a saw cut in the ring somewhere that you have to glue back together. For me, that's more difficult to hide than just a straight line where I join these back together. So I'll pass this around. You look at it real close and you'll find it. I will say this is the first bowl from a board that I did. And this one was done, I'm going to guess, 30 years ago. Kind of aged myself. But this one has a few catches in it. But I got it so thin that it got to the point I couldn't keep it on the lathe and turning true. So I had to stop. You take a look at that and you kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about.
I will say this. When I demonstrated bowling the board for our club and for the Fort Worth club,
Yes,
I
sir.
actually did it on a scroll saw where I drilled an angled hole, threaded the blade through, had the table tilted, and cut the rings that way. And that eliminates the need to re-glue the rings.
Okay. So the process that Jim Bob just described is a second way that you can cut a bowl from a board or cut your rings. And that is exactly what I did on this bowl, because I didn't want to cut the piece of wood in half and then glue the rings back together. So when this one was still a ring, a disc, I laid it out with my compass, and then I tilted the table on my scroll saw. I made a little drill guide at that same angle, and then I went in and I drilled a really tiny hole just that the scroll saw blade would fit through at that angle on each one of these rings, and I cut them out individually on the scroll saw. Came back and stacked it together and was able to turn those smooth in. So that's the way that I did that. So going back to where can you get your wood when you're doing something like this? This piece of wood right here was a cabinet door in its first life. Okay, I'll pass it around, but you could see right there a glue line when the cabinet maker glued up his pieces of maple to make this. There's actually one here and one here. When I got it, it was a door, had some kind of finish on it. I got that off, cut a square, and then made the bowl from a board from that. I did put some, enhance the back of it just a little bit. I painted it, and then I got some of that spray that you can put on to give it that little design right there. It's a deco type thing, kind of. It comes out of the can like silly put or silly string kind of, but it is designed as a paint. And I think you can order it through Craft Supply. One of the professional wood turners sells it and has multiple colors that you can find. You can start getting a little more advanced as you work on your design technique. If you do try this, I would recommend that you do your first one from a flat piece of wood. That's the width that you need it. Cut it to the length that you need it so that you don't have a large investment in, number one, money, and number two, time in that first one. Practice a little bit, get used to how it cuts and how you need to cut your rings and all to stack them up. And then you can start getting a little more advanced with it. This looks like it's complicated. This actually is white oak, purple heart, white oak, purple heart. What I did is I just cut strips of wood, glued up a long piece, ran it through the planer, got it smoothed out, and then I took it to the miter saw and I cut 4 pieces out of it. So you can see how those 4 pieces cut out of it. Then I just put them together and I put a spacer in between them of purple heart to make the X pattern. It's really fairly simple to do. When it started then, it was a square piece like that, about 3/4 of an inch thick, maybe slightly thicker. And then I cut the rings. And I cut these rings on the lathe, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a little while. When you start using straight lines like this, you have to be really careful when you glue it back together because it's difficult to make sure that you get all of these lines lined back up so that they look like they're a solid piece. I'll pass this around as well, let you critique it, but you will see that there are several, when you find the rings that I cut, you'll see that some of them don't line back up. And for me as a wood turner, that's what catches my eye, is I start looking at it, really nice work, but then all of a sudden I didn't take my time and get that glued up just like I needed to.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
What glue have you found works best in doing that and then hides as best as possible the glue line?
Yeah, and so the question is, how do you hide the glue line? And that's going to be a trial and error type thing. It's hard to hide the glue lines on these type bowls for a couple of reasons. One is your glue, when you glue it back together, I have a tendency to want to glue it back together on my bench, my workbench. If you do that, you have to make sure that you're putting equal pressure all the way around the ring. If you don't put equal pressure on it, then you're not going to pull all the gap out of it. You think you have the gap out. You may even get glue squeeze out, but it's not a tight gap and it's going to show up. Ask me how I know. Because that's one of the biggest challenges with these. The best way to glue it back up is if you have a jumbo jaws for your lathe or some kind of mechanism that you can put the ring back in on the lathe and hold it secure so that it's perfectly centered, then you can use the pressure from your lathe tailstock to apply pressure on it to glue it back together. You are going to be more accurate if you use something like that. Otherwise, you're going to have to do some trial and error type experimenting with how you can glue it up.
You just use normal type bond?
So I use the blue type bond. It's called Premium. It is, just by the way, it's not water soluble. And so if you get it on you, it's going to stay in your clothes even if you run it through the washing machine. It's not coming out. So that's the biggest negative to that. It does have a fairly quick tack time. And so you can do that. And I've been pretty satisfied with it. And I haven't tried anything other than type bond glues. I'll show you one in a minute that I had to use 5-minute epoxy on because it's got resin in it. Type bond's not going to adhere to that resin. Okay, here's another bowl from a board. It looks like a segmented bowl, and that was what I was trying to accomplish. But this particular bowl, when I started, it was a long piece of mahogany. It was about 7 inches wide. I don't remember how long, but let's just say 36 inches long. I cut wedges out of it on the chop saw. So if you can imagine this, if it were lined up, it would be one big wedge. And I cut 12 of them so that I could glue them back together. It's very similar to the same concept you use when you're doing a segmented bowl. Only it was a full wedge, so it went back together like a pizza. After I got it cut like that, I cut some real thin pieces of veneer and I put in between each segment and glued those back together. And so it was still a flat piece of wood, disc shape, but I have the black veneer in between them now. After I got that done, I sanded it down smooth, and then I glued a piece of veneer on the top of it. The piece of veneer that's separating the rings was glued flat on top of the flat piece of wood. And then I cut my rings, alternated every other one when I glued it back together, and that's what gave me this design. Any questions on that? Okay, on this one, I did put a solid piece of mahogany on the bottom of it for the foot. And typically, I am going to glue some kind of foot on the bottom of them because that's going to give me a mechanism to hold it on the lathe. Okay?
Where do you get your veneer?
I think I ordered it from Craft Supply. I ordered one of those where you get a bunch of different colors in a bag, the economy pack or something. I say economy, it's not cheap. All that veneer is going to be fairly expensive.
I just ordered one order from another place. And if anybody wants veneer, get with me because the veneer itself is pretty cheap, but freight will eat your lunch.
Okay, so you want to possibly place a big order and consolidate the freight costs? Good idea. I might take you up on some of that. This is one that I did just to kind of refresh my skill set before this demo. Very pretty piece of quilted maple. You can see some sartorius on the back of it. I'll pass this around as well. I did glue a little bit of foot on it. Of course, it was much bigger than this when I started. I turned it down to that shape. But you talked about the glue lines and how to get it glued back. I did glue this one on the lathe with a jumbo jaw, so it was perfectly centered. And the glue lines are tighter. Right up here, there's a little bit of a gap in there. When I took it off the lathe, all of that was very smooth. Now you can actually feel some of the glue lines because the wood has moved a little bit. And that's the next thing I want to mention to you is the wood is going to move as a woodworker, you probably already know that it's going to move. You can't necessarily predict what it's going to do. So the quicker you get it glued back together, the better off you are. If you cut your rings and say, I'm going to glue that tomorrow, and you come back out there, they're not going to be perfectly flat. You stack them up and you go, how am I going to fix that? Well, there's not a good fix for that except to run it through a surface sander and then glue it up. But I would recommend that if you decide to make one, try to plan ahead and make sure you have enough time to get it cut and glued back together all at one time out there in the shop. Okay, as you start practicing with these, you start watching some YouTube videos, and I highly recommend that you go to YouTube, hit the search bar up there, and then type in economy bowl or bowl from a board. They're called the both. They're the same thing. It's the same concept. But you're going to get a long list of videos that are posted out there. They're all worth watching. Some are going to actually be instructional. There are some that you watch the video and it's somebody making a bowl from a board, but there's no audio to it. There may be music in the background or something, but they're not teaching you anything. There are some guys that actually have very good instructional videos out there, and so you'll find them as you go. I highly recommend them. But as you get through it, as you get into it, you're going to want to start doing some things that are a little more complicated. I'm going to show you a few other bowls real quick. This is a bowl from a board, same concept. It's a piece of mesquite slab. It started out, it was about 2 inches thick. I got it, well, I'll just back up a little bit. I started by finding the center point, and I used a Forstner bit to bore this hole. I made it deep enough that I had a mortise that I could expand my jaws in. I put it on the lathe like that. Have to be very careful. The clearance is a whole lot more now. And if you haven't had any experience turning square-edged wood, it is a knuckle buster. And it can actually, you turn that up to high speed, it can break fingers and all. So be extremely cautious if you're going to do that. I would even recommend that you put some kind of tape around the outside edge of it, especially that first time, so that you know that that's a danger zone. Okay? Give yourself a reminder. But once I got it mounted up, then you can see the angle right there. I cut that with a parting tool. The centerpiece was loose. This piece actually came loose and it's loose on the lathe for a couple of seconds. You got to turn it off as quick as you can. I did build a device that will, a backer board that'll hold it. And if you're doing something square, I'd recommend that you use a backer board, because the square corners are going to hit something when it comes loose. It's not going to fly off the lathe, but it's going to be turning between this little piece and the head of the lathe. So it could hit your tool rest or whatever. So be cautious about that. A backer board will hold it in place till you can get the lathe stopped and get it off. And I apologize for not bringing that today. I did want to show you that. Okay, bowl from a board. I brought this one. I'm going to say that it's still unfinished. I have a couple of coats of sanding sealer on it, and it's a pretty nice finish right now, but I wanted to get your opinion on the final finish for this. And what I'm debating is, should I leave the live edge like it is, or should I burn it? So, leave it. How many of you say leave it like it is? Anybody want to see it burn? Nobody. Okay. I'm going to leave it like it is then. I'll just finish it out.
That's more natural what you're looking at.
It is a natural piece like that.
What type of wood is this?
That's quilted maple.
Well,
Quilted maple. Those lines going across it is the quilting and the piece of maple. It's going to cost you a little more per board foot, but occasionally you can find it out at Acacia. Sometimes they'll have quilted maple. Bird's eye maple is a really pretty wood as well, of course. Okay, another piece of mesquite. Is this on the camera right for y'all? Okay, this is a piece of mesquite that had a live edge. I cut it and put the two live edges together. I cut it into a disc, and then I actually cast the resin. So remember, it was a flat disc when I cast the resin. So I could have made a plate out of it at that point. What I decided to do, or my intentions were, I was going to come back and I was going to cut rings and stack the rings. And so that's the process that I used. Resin, when you start putting resin in wood, then it's going to complicate things just a little bit. If you don't have experience with it, it does not act and react exactly like wood does. And so it was a little more challenging to turn. And when I had to glue my rings back together, I couldn't use traditional type bond glue. I had to use epoxy. And I actually used 5-minute epoxy. So I'd mix it up, spread it, and then clamp it. I did it one layer at a time so I could keep it as centered as I possibly could. But one of the issues that I now have discovered is because it is translucent, when you look at the glue rings, in some of them at least, I can see bubbles in the glue where that 5-minute epoxy had some bubbles in it. So I'm going to, if I do one in the future, I'm going to try something a little bit different where I can control that instead of getting bubbles in it. But I have not finished this out. This was turned this week. I still need to do something with the foot. But you can see here, to chuck it on the lathe, I used a faceplate in a scrap piece of wood. But I actually am going to use some of this. Once I get up past the screws, I'll part it off and make that part of the foot. Okay?
say again why you couldn't use top bond.
Because it will not adhere to the epoxy.
Oh,
I mean, the resin.
Scott, on that epoxy, to get some of the bubbles out of it, what I have seen is people put it on, you can't do 5-minute epoxy the other way, but if you put it on hot plate or put it on some kind of heat, it'll dissipate the bubbles out, and then you can spread it and use it without the bubbles in it.
Yeah, so you're saying a longer curing epoxy. Right.
Sometimes they gas it.
The reference on that artisan epoxy that I got that use a blowtorch just with the heat directed towards it for a hot.
Yeah.
So that's not going to work to put between layers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I use
the bubbles first.
Yeah, you gotta do it when you
do it.
put it in.
So we're talking about two different things maybe. Casting resin, you can degas it and get the bubbles out. I actually put it in a pressure pot and got the bubbles out of the resin. But when I tried to glue it back together, the 5-minute epoxy, I couldn't get the bubbles out of it. So y'all were talking about using that UV resin, the UV light. That might do it because there's no mixing to that UV resin, is there?
no.
It's already pre-mixed. You just have to put it on there and then hit it with UV light. So I think that would probably be the best solution there.
You gotta make sure your light can get to it.
Yeah, you can't do it.
Okay.
Penetrate.
So like between the two pieces of wood, it's not going to hit it.
Probably not.
Good. So those are things that I'm trying to learn still as far as gluing up resin like that if we're going to stack rings. One of the YouTube videos that you'll see out there is a guy. His website is Mayuko, Mayuko. I don't know for sure what country he's from. I do know that he has access to a lot of rosewoods and different kind of woods because a lot of his stuff is glued together like this. He's using exotic woods that would cost you $95 a board foot or whatever to buy. He uses it like it's growing on trees. He's got a lot of it out there. So looking for I had a really nice piece of spalted pecan. It was about 7 inches wide and only, 18 inches long. So I'm trying to think, what could I do with that? Well, I decided to use a little bit of it and highlight it in a bowl. So when you look at this, I've got a pretty deep bowl, but I started with a piece of wood that is only 1 inch thick. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you what kind of wood this is. This is spalted pecan. The dividers running this way are wenge. This reddish color is what? Mesquite. Okay, I have some really pretty mesquite that somebody bought for stair treads, and they had some left over. I happened to be in the right place at the right time and got it cheap. And it's all 1 inch thick, kiln dried mesquite. So I'm hanging on to it for special things. This, of course, is just some maple. And then these, that's walnut, that's maple, and then again, that's wenge. Okay, so the process for gluing that up is the piece of pecan in the center and the two pieces of maple, the two pieces of mesquite all had to be the same thickness. And so I got those cut and I ran them through the drum sander before I glued them up. Then I cut the piece of maple and the piece of walnut and I ran them through the drum sander and got them all to 1/4 inch thickness. And so while it was still a flat piece of wood, I glued the walnut on top of the pecan. Okay, so I've got a 3/4 inch piece of pecan with a 1/4 inch piece of walnut on top of it. On the mesquite, I glued a 1/4 inch piece of maple on top of it. And then when I glued it together, I put the wenge in between them and ran it through. Once it dried, then I ran it through the drum sander and I had that flat piece of wood. So when it started out, it was a square, just like the outside corners still is. I decided for design purposes, I wanted it to have that square top so that I could get that design right there. These pieces were my guide in gluing it back together. Because as I cut my rings, I had to make sure that I got these lined back up when I glued it together. So that piece of wenge, if y'all are picturing what I'm talking about, when it was ready to glue up, it was only 1/4 inch wide, about 1.25 inches thick, and 12 inches long. 2 of those glued up. But then when I cut my rings, it gives me that effect. Okay? When you do your YouTube search, you'll come to his website. He has very beautiful turnings, but he does no instruction. There's no talking at all. He'll show you all the different pieces of wood that he's using. He quickly goes through how he cuts it. how he puts it together, running it through the planer, then running it through the drum sander, all of that. So you can watch it multiple times and make notes, and you can figure out what he's doing. But it's going to take a few times to get it in your mind exactly like what he's doing. But what I did is I took it out, I put it on my iPad and go out to the shop, get ready to make this cut. I go back and watch that little part of the video. So I knew exactly what he was doing. Then I made notes and all. But this one was a challenge. And I think that the final product is going to be worth it. But again, I did the inside of this last night. So I left the foot on it because it does need to go back on the lathe and let me finish up a few things before I finish it out. But that is a bowl from a board.
And that's exceptional.
Thank you. This one was quite the challenge, but this one I would do again because of the end result. That one with resin, I'm not sure I'll do that one again.
So
But somebody's going to have to really like it. Yes, sir.
the difference in these different pieces, some are fairly flat and some are pretty deep. How do you determine, or your saw cut angle? I realize is what the difference is.
Yeah.
But give us guidelines on that. You want a steeper?
Okay. Yeah, I'll address that.
Scott, when you remount this on the lathe, you'll use your pivot and the chucks. Will you come inside of it with a
Yeah, something to stabilize it.
stabilizer? That's just the tailpiece. But
Yeah.
You'll have something pushed up in there.
Yes. And I'll show you that here in just a little while when we get to that one. So I've got a couple of questions that have been asked that I want to go ahead and address. The first one is the thickness of the pieces of wood. That the angles that you cut the rings at will be influenced by the thickness of your piece of wood. As I said before, the thinner it is, it's going to reduce your flexibility on the angle of the cut. And so probably the best way that I could explain that is go back to this diagram right here. And I'm going to strongly encourage you, like go back to my teaching days, when a student would design something, or usually the students didn't have much creativity when they were designing something. But from an instructor standpoint, I said, before you can cut your first piece of wood, you have to show me a drawing with dimensions. So what did that make them do? Think it through a little bit, with my assistance, of course, but they had to design it. And they had to go ahead and think it through and make sure that it's going to work. So before you cut your first one, put it on paper. Go ahead and draw your angles and your cut lines so that you know that it's going to work. It'll save you a lot of frustration. So what I've done with this is I transferred these lines up, and then I actually cut a piece of wood to represent what the side of the bowl would look like. Okay? So you see these horizontal lines right here are different layers of the rings that are cut. This one I cut on the bandsaw, so it's close to perfect as far as the way they line up. If you're cutting it with a parting tool, it's not going to be as perfect as that. You have to remember that your parting tool is thicker than a bandsaw blade, and so you're probably going to lose at least 1/8 of an inch curve if you're using a parting tool, whereas a bandsaw blade maybe 1/16 of an inch, scroll saw blade even less than that. Okay, but you need to take into account that curve because you're going to lose that, and when you glue it back up, it's going to impact the interior wall and the exterior wall of the blank that you're fixing to cut. Okay?
Scott, is it easier to hide your challenges by having like a contrasting, segment in there that you can accommodate that change?
Yes, good point. So, excellent question. The question is if you put some kind of contrasting wood or material between layers, would it help you hide the glue joint? And the answer is yes. It will definitely help you hide the glue joint. I haven't tried colored glue to see if what that would do. I don't know that would give me enough of a glue joint, but like that one that I put the veneer in, you can't see glue lines in that one. This is the one I'm going to turn here in just a little while. To go back to the question that was asked, this is a thicker piece of wood when I glued it up. So I started out with a 1-inch thick piece of maple and I glued walnut on it. When I'm done, there's only going to be a small walnut ring left in between those layers. Okay? So I'm starting with a pretty big chunk of wood. When I cut this, I could have cut the outside angle or cut the outside edge at the same angle. In this case, I opted to leave it flat so I could do something a little bit decorative on the rim, or at least have the option to do something decorative on the rim. Some people like that. Here's one that's very similar. Same piece of wood. I have a long stock of thick maple like that. But you see how I had some option at doing something decorative on the rim because I left it square. So think that process through as you start cutting. You can leave it, and when I say square, we're talking about round bowls. When I say square here, I'm talking about that angle right there at a 90, not a square like some of those other bowls where you got a 90-degree corner. Okay, so same concept. Other questions before I get on the lathe? I've done a lot of talking.
That was important talking.
Yeah. If you are paying attention and kind of following the concept, you can be successful when you go watch the videos first and then get out there and find that piece of wood that you're going to turn. A couple of things as you get ready to start turning, you need to make sure that you have the setup and the capabilities of doing this and being successful. So one of the things that I found has been very helpful for me is having a chuck. Of course, you're going to have some kind of 4-jaw chuck or a faceplate to mount it with on the lathe. You've seen both methods that I passed around. You can either do a dovetail like this, a tenon, or you can do a mortise like that one bowl that went around, or you can use a faceplate. So you do have several options there as to how you mount it. Having something that will allow you to mount it from the tailstock end is also going to be helpful. And I'll show that to you here in just a minute. About 30 minutes. Okay. So we're going to back up to where we would actually start if we were going to make one. So this piece of wood right here is another piece of maple. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chuck. I got it prepared by putting a glue block on it. And so I can get it mounted up. Before I cut it into a disc shape, I found the center point. So I used a long straight edge, corner to corner, marked my center, and then notice that I made a line going all the way across it. I do recommend that you make that line going all the way across it, and then on half of it, I made a squiggly mark on it. That's going to help me line the rings back up when I get ready to glue it. The squiggly line makes me, I'll know in my mind that they all go on the same side. The straight line all goes on the same side. But a line through it, and notice also, I did it across the grain rather than with the grain, because the grain will confuse you a little bit sometimes in that you try to get it lined back up with the grain, and you wind up getting a little bit of a twist in it because you cut it at an angle. That grain is also running at an angle, so you can't get it exactly trued back up like that. Use a line. Okay, so we're going to get this chucked up.
It looks like to me you use a dovetail.
I did use dovetail. On this particular chuck, it has a dovetail jaw on it. Okay, I'm going to put a lot of pressure on it when I get it locked in. Make sure I'm getting it snug. And I'm going to use a parting tool to actually cut my ring. And so what I'm doing now is going to get set up for that process. I brought got a little rock going here in the lathe. I brought this from home, but it's designed to get into boxes. If you're turning a box, this will come off, but you can lay your tool on that and get deeper into a box or a turning. That is put there to use as a pivot and it can be removed. For this purpose, I don't need to do that. But I need this to be able to line up with the ring that I want to cut. Okay, somebody asked about stabilizing. I think Jim asked this question. How am I going to stabilize this? So what I'm going to do is just take a live center. I brought that. That one already has a dovetail cut on it. So I actually took some time one day and just made about a dozen of these in my shop. And I've got them in a bag so that when I need to glue a dovetail on the back of one, a little faceplate, I have them already made. It's already sized for this particular chuck. And all I have to do is pull one out and glue it to it. I'm going to use this piece of plywood kind of as my stabilizer.
I don't know if that floor was level or not.
I think part of it is we need to adjust the feet on the bottom of the lathe. Okay, so I'm going to get that. So I'm cutting with the thickness of my parting tool and all. I need to take that into consideration. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can determine the angle. I'm going to use a 45-degree angle. As I said, that's going to be the most common. It's the easiest for you to, especially on the first bowl, it's easy to draw 45-degree lines for your outside edge on your bowl. So what I've done is I've taken a little piece of wood and I cut a 45-degree angle on it and label it 45. So I know that that's my template for a 45-degree angle. I've done the same thing with the 30, and I've got multiple pieces like this. That wood, that last bowl that I showed you, it was actually cut at a 30-degree angle. So I use that template for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this template and lay it on my tool rest like that, and then I'm going to clamp it down. That's going to be my guide for my parting tool. Okay? So what I need to determine now is where I want to cut that first ring. And so to do that, I'm going to measure the thickness of my wood. It doesn't really matter what the actual measurement is. I'm using this as a distance guide. So I'm going to take that measurement and I'm going to transfer it right here and make a mark. And I want to go ahead and put that mark all the way around so it's visible. And then I'm going to put my guide on there and line up to the mark. Just as a word of caution, whichever side of the line you decide to cut on, be consistent as you cut, make all your cuts. If you cut on the inside of the line the first time and on the outside of the line the next time, it's going to be hard to get it to line back up. So either cut inside, outside, or down the center of the line. Okay? I'm just going to use a parting tool to make the cut. So I've seen these guys on YouTube that they'll go to great effort to make their own parting tool, and they'll actually make it longer where they can cut deeper. I did that as well. And I decided I'm bringing this one for the demo rather than what I made, because the one that I made, I cut it out of a circular saw blade. So it is pretty stout, but it's a good bit thinner than that. But what I found is that cutting a real thick piece of wood, you're still getting too much tool into the wood if it's not designed for that. And I just didn't want to get embarrassed, especially in Waco, with a homemade tool that fails on me. So I decided not to use that one. I may try again and make sure I have a quality piece of material to do it with. But there are guys out there making them out of reciprocating saw blades and stuff like that. I just caution you, make sure that you're using something that's a quality piece of metal if you're going to make your own tools, so that you don't get yourself in a bind. If it breaks or pulls in, you're not going to have time to react to it without it possibly doing some damage. So that's my word of caution to you there.
Scott, years ago when they gave us those, you and me went down the middle of in those,
Bandsaw blades?
planer blades.
Oh,
Did you ever make one out of that?
no.
I haven't either. I was just wondering if that was
Okay, so he's talking about those, like those 13-inch planer blades, knives, that they're a little bit thinner probably than that parting tool, and you could put a good edge on those. If you know somebody that has a sawmill, the used bandsaw blades from a sawmill, when I was in San Angelo, they would take those used blades and cut them into 16-inch pieces and hand them out at our meetings. And they do make a good parting tool. And they are half as thick as that. But it's good for spindle work. For cutting into a thick piece of wood like I'm about to, I would not recommend it. Just make sure that yours is going to be safe if you decide to make your own tool. Okay, so what I'm going to do is cut this at about 600 RPMs. Make sure I've got it set up like I want it. And I like to cut as close to center as I can or slightly above center. And so I'm going to need to drop my tool rest just a little bit. I'm going to make a first cut and see how it's cutting, but I can tell I'm a little bit above center by the time you get the point of the tool. But if it cuts good, that's going to be okay. So I'm about 650 on my RPMs. I'm going to hold my tool flat. I like to grip it like this, and I'm going to put pressure on it with my index finger. Okay. Now, as I start cutting, that tool is going to get hot, and I'm going to have to move my index finger, but I'm going to actually start my cut like this. Okay, I'll cut a little ways like that. With this type tool, it's sharp on both sides, so I'm going to rotate it over just to kind of keep it cool. and I'm going to cut a little bit deeper. Now, you may have heard people say, you can hear that wood talking to you. Y'all can hear the noise that it's making. That noise is going to change in just a little bit when I start getting close to coming out the backside. And so if I do notice that, I'm going to try to slow down a little bit with the pressure that I'm applying and then cut it off immediately. And yes, I realize now I did not put my face shield down. So. Hey, did y'all hear that noise change? It started telling me it's about to come through there. So I actually backed off a little bit on the pressure that I was applying to make that cut. Now, when you're using this technique and you're cutting it on the lathe, you're going to have to remove this every time. I recommend that you take it off the lathe and then set back up and cut the next ring. You will see some of those guys on the videos put it right there and tape it and leave it there. It may work for them, but I would be really cautious by leaving it on there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take that off.
Have you ever had that ring bind on your tool right before it comes off?
No. I did mention that I made a backer board. So I've got a piece of plywood that stands up here 16 inches, and I cut a U shape out of it so that it'll fit on here and it'll slide back so that I can adjust it this way on the lathe and lock it in place. And I do apologize for not bringing that to show it to you. Okay, so what I'm going to do now that I've got that first ring cut is I'm going to line it up. That's how it was originally. On the back side of it, I've still got that X where I mark the centers, so I can use that to help me get everything lined up. If I were gluing this up with jumbo jaws, then I would have that centered. It will center it for me. I would put this on my chuck in the lathe. It would be centered. I could mark where my glue needs to go, apply my glue, press it together, and let it be my clamping device. That's the best way to get it centered on the lathe. Any questions with that process? Okay, I know we're going to run out of time here in a minute, but I do want to show you a few cuts on the bowl itself. 15? Oh, I can turn the bowl into
You can have it finished for that time.
Okay, so now let's just say that we have gone through the process. We've cut all of our rings, and we've glued our bowl blank together now. We're ready to turn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this to the headstock. This is just simply a faceplate with a piece of wood glued or mounted to it. This is just a plywood door. Used to be a door in its other life. And I put a piece of abrasive on it, just like you get for your disc sander. It's very true. And so I'm going to use that to grip the wood, and I'm going to put the pressure on it from the back. So let me get this chucked back up. This is how I'm going to turn the outside of the bowl. Yes, sir.
You cut that off and the disc went inside. Is there a reason you don't cut it the other way, that it comes off each time?
I've never seen anybody cut it like that, but if it comes off the outside, you might be able to pull it out and pull it away
Go on
from
your arm, perhaps.
Yeah.
There is a video of the guy doing that.
where he cuts it from the outside, cuts the angle.
Yeah, he cuts from this side of the blade.
Yeah.
Or does it get trapped up into tool rest?
I have not tried that.
I didn't know if there was a yes, you better, or how not do that.
Okay, to mount this where I've got my 4-jaw chuck on the tailstock, you're going to have some type of mounting device. This is a live center that's got a thread that fits this chuck. I bought this off of the Penn State website. They're not terribly expensive, but it's got a ball bearing in it, rolls very well. You can also buy a one-way or a tool very similar to this. These are the same things. This one has the cone adapter screwed onto it. It will unscrew. This one, I just put that adapter on it. So it's going to do the same thing, act the same way. If you're into segmented turning, you probably have stuff like this already because you use it in the tailstock all the time to glue up with. Okay? So I'm going to have to wrap this up here pretty quick. When I get done, I'm going to give you an opportunity to give me some constructive criticism so that I can make some notes and see what I need to adjust with the presentation when I do go to Waco. I know that I'm taking all of those bowls, so I can cut down the presentation a little bit by reducing the number of bowls that I've got there.
Well, what we have to remember is that S.W.A.T, his time is an hour and a half.
Yeah, I'll have a good bit more time to actually have some Q&A and discussions and all. I realize it's not locked down yet. I'm getting some space there for my tool rest. Okay, so that abrasive paper on that disc is going to be enough to hold that so it's not going to slip on me when I start turning. But this will allow me full access to the bottom of the bowl so I can turn the outside of it. Okay, I'm going to turn the speed down, turn the lathe on, and then start bringing it up to speed. You can see that it's pretty true. I need to true it up a little bit. And one of the other things that I'll mention, because we probably won't get there in this demo, I do need to true up this outside edge and then start turning my profile. Before I actually make the cut, first cut, I left this out, and this is important. You need to have some type of caliper that you can measure thickness of the wall. When you glue up those multiple rings like that, the glue joints on the left side and the right side of the bowl are not going to be exactly the same. They'll be off just a little bit. So, check the thickness of the wood, which this one, I've got a lot of wood to play with, so I could actually make some design there. But what I need to be more concerned about is right at the glue joint. Make sure that you've got plenty of wood at the glue joint, because that's where you get into trouble turning one of these when you start, when you go back and start doing your profile. So this one's enough that I could actually put some curve in it, actually do kind of an OG shape on the outside of it here. And once you get through turning and you start the inside, then you're going to need to measure the inside as well and make sure that you know what your wall thickness is going to be, or that joint thickness especially. Okay, so the next thing people are going to ask is, are you going to use a carbide tool or a bowl gouge? And the answer is yes. I'll probably use both. I brought both. I'm a bowl gouge type guy. I prefer to use a bowl gouge, but I also understand that the bowl gouge sometimes has some limitations, and one will cut better than the other on certain designs, certain pieces of wood. So I'm not going to be so stubborn that I'm not going to be willing to try a carbide tool if I need to. On that resin, carbide's going to definitely be the better option than the bowl gouge because of the way the bowl gouge is going to cut resin. It chips out really bad. So I like to use a sweat background on my bowl gouge. What I'm going to do is start right over here. I'm going to start cutting that corner off and getting me a rim like I want. And I'm going to reduce some of that before I come back and square that edge. Here's the camera still good. On this particular piece of wood, I know that this piece down here is a solid piece, so I'll only have to worry about those joints as far as the thickness goes. So I've got a lot of area that I can play with there as far as my design. But I'm going to pretty much leave it like that. I'm going to make it a little bit more of a round right here and maybe a little more of an OG shape right there. And then I think I'm going to be satisfied with the design on that. What kind of time do I have now?
You got about 20 minutes.
20? 5? Okay, so I'm going to get closer to a finished cut now. To do that, I'm going to increase my speed. I'm at about 720 right there. I'm going to go to about 12. And I'm going to try to do this in about 2 passes, so I'll get about halfway, and then I'll take a look and see if I can make another cut. I don't particularly like what I'm getting right there. What do y'all think? I think it'd be better just a little bit smoother than that. Okay, I got that probably close enough that I could scrape it real quick. I'll just do a little bit of that, and then we'll square up this edge and turn it around. When it comes to sanding, I have found that I like to use these sanding discs that are readily available at hardware stores. This particular brand I buy at a Gaydon Lumber. We buy a lot of plywood for the cabinet shop out there, but they carry that. Works very well. And then I highly recommend these sanding sponges. This one has a Velcro loop on the back so that you can kind of put it in your hand and grip it a little bit. It also it's flexible, so it'll sand to the radius, but it also helps protect your hand from the heat that you're going to generate sanding. So I'm going to just hit it real quick. I'm not going to try to sand it out, but just show you. Pardon me?
You got those from Gaydon?
No, I got the sanding paper. The disc itself, I found it online somewhere. I don't remember the name of the website. So I'm going to reduce my speed for sanding. I'm about 500. You can see it will take a lot off. One of the other things that I like to use that I'm just going to show you real quick, I'm not going to sand it out, but you can buy this product at a lot of different big box stores. This came from Walmart. It's called Orange Glow, but it says It's for wood furniture. It's a dusting type product, but I found that it works extremely well when you're trying to make your final cuts or scraping a bowl. I'm going to put a little on there and just show you what I'm talking about. It does take a little while to dry. Has an orange citrus smell to it, so it smells good. There you go. But you see, when this bowl's finished out, you can see that piece of maple has some quilting in it. It'll be a really pretty bowl, polished out. But I'll let that absorb and, soak in just a little bit. It's an excellent time now to come back with the scraper if you still need to do some scraping. But I can let it rest for a little while and then come back and sand it. And it's going to sand smoother, quicker than it would if I were not using a product like that. Okay?
How long do you have to wait to sand?
For sanding, about 5 minutes is going to be adequate. If I start sanding right now, it's going to load the paper. So I'll just go ahead and show you what it'll do real quick. But you can see it's going to load the paper. But that's one of the things I like about this paper is because it's a mesh, I can blow that out with an air hose and keep using it. So you do get extended life with that type of sandpaper. I don't think that it's going to discolor the wood when I sand it out. You can tell that it did put some color on it, but that's wet wood as well. I don't think that it's going to discolor. I haven't noticed that before. Okay, so before I would actually turn this around in my shop, I would go ahead and finish the the outside. I would have that done. And then I would turn around to the inside.
Scott, will you put the chuck on the backside so that you maintain that same pattern?
Yeah, so it depends on how you're mounting it. Like if I was using the faceplate, I put the faceplate on there rather than the chuck. But it does, because that's how I'm going to mount it on the headstock when I do the inside, it needs to be mounted the same way, whichever technique you're using.
I like the faceplate because I know when I got a hold of it, I got a hold of it.
And I will agree with that.
I don't want it to get a hold of me.
Notice that I am double checking my chuck since I have turned it around now. I'm going to use some pressure on the bottom of the bowl. I'm going to take the time to back that out. One of the things that you'll see on one of the videos that Mayuku, I don't know for sure if that's how he pronounces his name, but he uses a shaft or a cylinder, I should say, of wood, and he puts it in there and then puts his tailstock up against it and uses that as his stabilizer. On that deep bowl over there, that's what I did yesterday when I was turning it. Works very well. But what I'm going to do in this case is just use this little disc. I need to back off enough that I can get a little bit of clearance for my tool rest and the banjo.
I'll defer to the others that are much more experienced, but personally, I think it's a great idea if you're at SWAT, to have a light colored and banded work project in your black shirt, because the contrast will make it easier to see from the distance.
Okay, so like that.
Exactly.
What about my physique? Do I need to go on a diet before?
No, that's just your nice round form. You know.
I watched one of those videos that I did. I mean, one of the demonstrations that I did one time. I was just watching that to kind of see how I sounded and all. And it was one where the camera was set up pointing just like it is. Never showed my face, which was a good thing. But it did show my belly. And I didn't have my smock on, which hides some of that. Had the green shirt on.
Black will hide it.
I realized I need to go on a diet here if I'm going to do this and be on YouTube.
We can chip in for some spandex or, the Spanx.
Put
There
some
we
stuff on your belly and just lean up next to it. You get it all done at one time.
That's a good idea. Okay. You could tell by the way that it was rotating that the outside is not true. So now is the time for me to true that up. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but I do want it to be perfectly round. And then I'll start working on the inside. I'm not going to have time to do all of it, but I do want to make a couple of quick cuts. And I've yet to have one when I turned it to do the inside that was perfectly true. This one's pretty close on the outside. So the chucking method did help there, but it's hard to get them where they're going to reverse and stay perfectly true. Okay, I'm round there, so I'm going to move to the inside. And I'm not going to be able to spend much time right here doing the inside until I'm going to have to get rid of my tailstock pretty quick to get down to the bottom. And I do want to just do a little bit of the bottom, but I'm going to hit the shoulder just real quick, and then I'll move down. I'm going to use a pull cut just because of the space that I have with the tool, the tailstock up there.
Okay, now, talk about your flute orientation when you're doing that.
Okay. So watch how I'm going to position the tool. The flute orientation, it's rotated from what it was if I were doing a push cut. It would be similar to this. When I start doing a pull cut, I've got to rotate it like this. The cutting edge is now right here. Okay? If I close this too much and this makes contact, it's going to be a catch. Okay? That's guaranteed. So even if I close it and get too much of this, it'll be a catch. But with a gentle touch, I can actually use that as a scraper, and I'll do that here in just a minute to smooth that edge out. But I do want to make sure that I've got the tool positioned properly when I start doing that pull cut. You want to add anything to that? Okay. Yeah, this is a notorious catch if you're not cautious.
Carbide tool would work here.
A carbide tool would be great right here. Yeah, and I do have a carbide tool. It'd work like that. That Meiku, you're only going to see him use carbide tools. He doesn't do anything else. And a carbide tool would work great. I'll make a cut with a carbide tool here in just a second. Can y'all hear out there as I get closer to the rim? It starts skipping a little bit. That is because when I glued it up, I didn't get it perfectly centered. Okay, either that or the wood's moved a little bit, but you can see that it's not totally true right there. It's close, but that's what's giving me a little bit of chatter. I will eventually be able to get that turned out. So I am going to go to a carbide tool now and just make another pass. And what I noticed about the carbide tool is it's slower than center. So I'm going to stop and adjust it. It does it right exactly like the bowl gouge. So I want to make sure that I'm at center or slightly above when I go to a carbide tool. If you're below center, what are we going to have? Probably a catch. Okay. This is not one of those negative rate carbide tools, which that would be excellent if I had one. So carbide will work. It's just kind of what's your flavor. I'm going to back this off now and see if I can get down in the bottom real quick. And when I start moving to the bottom where my elbow is going to be across the bed of the lathe, I do not want this live center down here, so I've got to get it off.
Yeah, we don't want to call you Scott going.
Yeah.
Lord.
I don't want to be gored. And I'm going to go with a little bit longer tool post, tool rest. And I know we need to start wrapping up, so I'm just going to make a couple passes down here. Can y'all hear that it's getting a little catchy in there? You never know what you're going to run into when you're starting to work a piece of wood. Something could be embedded in it. It did.
Okay. Get you a thin strip of leather, cut a circle in the inside of it, and use that in between your chuck and it won't unscrew.
Okay. Yeah, because what unscrewed was this adapter right there. That's what was backing off. But it was when I started using the carbide and getting a little more aggressive with it. Okay, can y'all see that on the camera?
Yeah. The state of Texas?
It is the state of Texas. That's what it's supposed to be.
Ooh.
Is that your secret?
That's the secret right there. Of course, I'd have time to finish it at S.W.A.T, but
For your state of Texas, could you use a lighter wood?
I could.
Because from this distance, it doesn't really show very well.
Yeah.
It's cool.
But it is cool.
So you could laser South Phase wood turners on there, and all of a sudden you just explode.
Yeah. If I didn't have to glue that piece of walnut on top of it. A couple of things I did learn when I insert that Texas, I cut that out on a scroll saw and bored a hole, put it in there, and then cast it while it was still a flat piece. And then I glued the walnut on top of it. What I did not do is I did not seal the edges of the Texas or the hole that I bored. I didn't seal it with epoxy before I cast it. And the epoxy bled into the walnut. You can kind of see it a little bit.
That's still cool.
So I could have prevented that if I would have sealed it first and then cast it. Okay? Any questions?
You're kind of sneaky.
I know we used up all our time, so
Okay.
Good time. Good use of time.
thank you.
That's going to be a great demo. That's going to be very, very good.
Before we go, a couple announcements that Robert Sutter's asked me to put it to the group. If you have not gotten your pictures for our member directory, call him, make arrangements. If you need his number,
Yeah.
I can give it to you.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait for
Lunch.
What's your source?
Great cafe.
Tech Cafe on 50th Street.
Okay. One other thing.
Okay.
A lot of members are not
I haven't
logged
tried it,
in
but
and have
y'all
their
can inspire me.
information
I want to get some.
on the website.
Get logged in, get your information in there.
there's
Didn't know if there was information to put in.
Yeah, phone number, email, phone number.
They have
Our SWAT scholarship this
They
year,
have UV resins.
I've only gotten one volunteer, so he's gonna win it by default. Ron Schaefer is gonna get our SWAT scholarship and be our
Good
coordinator.
for all.
If I can get
Y'all help us get the chairs cleaned up and get stuff back to the closet. Appreciate it.
it's just as hard as I rock the same.
And how, what about the light? You buy some source that
I'm going to give you my phone number.
okay.
I'll give you. Most of these people it's not correct way to make it. I can't remember the way
Oh, no problem.
you can buy their little white chips from
I'll give it.
just about any but the light not exactly the red. One light specifies as silver white, and I'll give you that.
Deal.
Okay.
Deal.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yes, sir, Scott. Appreciate the demo. Good job.
Thanks.
Hey, you liking that boat? Or you just wait with the wall in there, right? Bill Charlie! This is bottom address. Here's my shop address. Okay. It's on the east side of Frankfurt, just south of 50. It's always a good idea to call before you come out. Hey, I do lunch almost every day. It may be early, but see you there. Yeah, I know. It's right here on this. Oh, you're not down, Rob? Ed took pictures of it, so. No, the one he had to show and tell.
Oh, I have not seen it.